Lovely. Thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciate the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here on the HYPE webinar. Today I'm really excited to talk to you about discovery-driven growth. It's a innovation system that I have been coached on for a number of years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed using it. I've seen it in work successfully in some very complex and challenging environments. So today I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you, and hopefully you'll be able to adapt it to your own challenges within your own businesses. A little bit about me. I have been delivering technology and innovation to primarily the supply chain and logistics industry for nearly 20 years. My more recent role was the head of innovation for the Brambles Group. You may not be familiar with them. They're an Australian company, but they have three major brands, global brands, that basically move the world's products around. So the equipment that you see with your products, your consumables or your business products being moved around in the forms of pallets and containers, they would most likely be part of the Brambles Group. And my role there was to with two major functions. One was obviously the cultural aspect of what we need to do as innovation leaders within our businesses, and then of course have some tangible impact on the overall commercial success of the business, which in itself was very challenging because the business was in 55 countries globally, 15,000 employees, so it was quite a challenge to change anything, especially the culture. Through that time, I had the privilege to work with Cameron and Associates, specifically Ron Perentozzi and Alex Van Putten, who actually trained me originally on discovery-driven growth and mentored me for the 5 years that I was in the Brambles group. When I left Brambles earlier this year, I of course reached out to them to continue to spread the message of discovery-driven growth. And most recently, as recent actually as just last week, I'm very privileged to join my mentor partners. And my mentor partners, we're focused on the connected industry, looking to accelerate time to value for industry leaders and startups. So it's a real nice synergy towards what I was looking to do as far as bringing innovation more broadly across particularly the supply chain industry where I'm most familiar. We have three functions that we focus on. In the executive search area, we're very much focused on bringing talent to the connected industry, with many connections obviously across that industry to be able to achieve that. We accelerate business through hands-on consulting and advice, and then we also work with investing and advising in the venture space. So, you know, really nice synergy and a lot of areas we can be working with discovery-driven growth. So with that in mind, let me start sharing my experiences with you. So as leaders of innovation, particularly in the corporate innovation world, we're often faced with working in business that says some really exciting stuff about innovation. We're developing a culture of innovation. Innovation is a core business of a core pillar of our business. It's in our DNA. It's a key part of our strategy. These are really exciting things to be hearing. They inspire us. They want us to really drive and push our innovation teams to really deliver. Sometimes, however, we might get slightly different reactions when we are trying to implement innovative change within a large corporate environment. It might be that we might hear a little bit too often things like, we've already tried it before. Those resources that we were willing to give you, well, actually they're not available this month. Yeah, what's with all the off-site workshops? I'm sure many of you are smiling right now, having people look at you funny for these off-site workshops that need doing. And you know what, thanks a lot. We do know that we need to invest in innovation, but right now our critical path is delivering on next quarter's targets. So this is fairly contradictory to what we hear as the business. And so what does that do to us as leaders of innovation? Well, it puts us in a bit of a tailspin. We're very passionate about what we do as far as driving innovative change, And in turn, what we start to do is we work a lot harder at trying to make it work. We tend to not be sure if we're politicians or salespeople, or sometimes I certainly used to feel like I was, calling from the rafters out about what we're trying to achieve in innovation. And then on the other hand, we're trying to juggle a lot of different pillars that need to be in place to make innovation effective. We're trying to drive leadership engagement. We're trying to have vision and strategy clear across the business. We're attempting to change culture, and we're re-looking at processes and tools and systems and communications, and eventually, it all becomes a bit too much, and we actually will find that we're trying to achieve change in all of these areas, but in fact we probably are not very successful in any of them. So what is it that we can do in response, and how does discovery-driven growth help us? I believe we should be focusing on two very simple things. Forget trying to move mountains, forget trying to get synergy between all the areas that we're trying to do, but focus on two things. One of those is being credible, and the other one is being relevant. By letting successfully delivered innovation carry you through, you will get the momentum you need from this to be the catalyst for change for everything else. Just because a business has actually said they want to have innovation and they want innovation-led growth, it doesn't always mean that the leaders of a business actually know how to both drive and accept this innovative change. So this approach to discovery-driven growth, it not only gives you a framework which you're about to see now around how to deliver growth options and how to look at how to develop new ventures, whether it's products, businesses, or business models. It will also give you a framework to bring into your business that will also, through teaching people about this framework, it will promote creative leadership. So how will discovery-driven growth achieve this? So firstly, discovery-driven growth was developed about 10 years ago by Rita McGrath and Ian McMillan. If you get a moment, try Google them. There's some really interesting content around that they have written. And they were sort of thinking about where does innovation go off the tracks inside of large companies. And what stood out to them was that the problem was actually dealing with uncertainty and the behaviours that uncertainty drives. So what discovery-driven growth does is it actually mimics more what a venture capitalist might do intuitively, and it's really turning innovation into a process that can be brought into an organisation, and the framework of discovery-driven growth does that. It's very simple, and it's also very powerful, and it's ultimately acknowledging and embracing what you don't know, and how you will go about learning that. So first and foremost, it's a non-conventional approach to business planning. So conventional planning, it's not entirely helpful when you're trying to talk about new ventures and new products and services. And in the conventional world, you can get away with projecting into the future. You can pretty much anticipate what challenges you're going to need to overcome. You're also going to have a fairly good idea of your budget and time, and you can hold your managers to being accountable to meeting those sort of numbers. But when of course you start talking about innovation, and a definition of innovation is uncertainty. Trying to build something new and different that perhaps comes with uncertainty. That turns that conventional world entirely on its head. And what you don't want is managers who start sort of skewing their estimates to make the numbers look like they work, even though they don't know a lot. And you don't want to be afraid of taking modest risks. And what you don't want is people to actually start feeling like failures. So a lot of the switch between the conventional and unconventional world is really recognizing and embracing that level of uncertainty and empowering an environment where failure is accepted as a means to learn. Discovery-driven growth will also mitigate your risks by turning that uncertainty into knowledge, and it ensures that you don't let assumption bias your decision making. Often you're not even aware that you are being biased in your decision making because of assumptions that you hold to your core. And what discovery-driven growth is a way of teasing those uncertainties and assumptions out and making sure that we look at every one of those and we appropriately learn about them to inform our decision making. So it's more of an approach of embracing risk and dealing with the uncertainty. Discovery-driven growth will also help reinforce the cultural element of what we so need to be in place when we are driving innovative change. It's a significant part of any business and certainly a significant part of being successful innovators. But culture is not essentially a thing. It's a set of learned behaviours. And so learned behaviours can be relearned. And discovery-driven growth can have an impact on that, by which you can start to teach people a way of managing the cost of failure and not the rate of failure. So what you'll start to see when we go through an example of discovery-driven growth is that we actually encourage the investment of small amounts of money to do quick, low-cost experiments and learning cycles as a means to learn about uncertainty. And what happens is when companies can tolerate this level of spend and therefore can tolerate a certain level of risk. And what this does is starts to change the mindset around learning as opposed to failing. And then in that it becomes a more agile means of making decisions. And last but certainly not by least is by changing our approach to have faster, cheaper, more impactful learnings of cycle, the whole dynamics of how the business will engage with innovation will actually also start to change. But it's not about changing everything at once. It's about remembering being credible and being relevant. So starting small, getting some wins on the board to gain that credibility, and then prove that you can be that innovation is an ongoing and critical part to the future growth of the business. So discovery-driven growth has been around for, as I said, about 10 years. Originated from Rita McGrath and Ian Macmillan. One of the very first books was in 1995, Discovery-Driven Planning. And as you can see through this timeline, it has certainly featured in a number of books, some that you may have even read in the past. And now it sits with Cameron and Associates as part of some validation modelling and tools that I'll talk about shortly. So how does it work? So there's three high-level aspects to it: framing, assumptions, checkpoint plan. It's nice and simple like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each of these steps, and I've got a very simple example to apply to this. But as I'm going through and think about it in all aspects, whether you're in corporate innovation, whether you're in startups, whether you do venturing, whatever aspect of business you are, this is a framework that will apply to all types of new ventures, products, services, new businesses. You think about it in the framework of your own. So firstly, framing an opportunity. This is a bit tongue-in-cheek, I'm sure, but this is about starting with something simple. Don't make it complex. When you're framing an opportunity, it's so easy to get lost in Excel spreadsheets and spending a lot of time in this space, and particularly in large corporate businesses, we have teams of people whose jobs are to do this. But essentially, this process, that's more the conventional way of planning. This is far more unconventional, and we don't want to do this at all. In fact, it was simply very simple, back of the envelope. So what we're really looking with discovery-driven growth is to see how we can guarantee an attractive upside right from the outset. So what this means specifically is looking to say, what does the desired business at maturity look like? And is it big enough for us for it to matter for us. So what do we need for this business from a maturity perspective? And you might hear me use the term steady state and maturity interchangeably. So discovery-driven planning starts, or growth starts at the bottom line. So here what we do is we first start with a reverse income statement, which runs from the bottom up. So instead of starting with estimates of revenue and then working down your income statement to derive your profits, we actually start with our required profits. And then we look to work our way up to the profit and loss and determine how much revenue it will take to deliver the level of profit we require, and therefore how much cost can be allowed. So essentially where we start with framing an opportunity is saying that our required profits is the necessary revenue less the allowable cost, which is the total reverse. So to give you an example, we've got a very simple example. This is a company who have a concept to design a high computer intensive desk, a digital desk. This is a combination of product and process, and you can sort of just read ahead here around what this opportunity is. So they want to design a new desk, they want to get it into the market at a lower cost, at the most competitive offering, and they anticipate it to be disruptive. But what they do know is they need to generate $5 million per year in profit, which is a 20% return on sales with 30% return on asset. So what does that look like in a return income statement? So this is of course a very simplistic example, but what we know is that we need to be able to achieve $5 million in profit. So based on that 20% return on sale, we therefore need $25 million in revenue, and therefore we have an allowable cost of $20 million. So right from the outset, we know at some high-level figures what it is that we really need to be able to make this worthwhile to look at. The second step is about identifying assumptions. And look, just before I go back onto that second step, that reverse income statement is something that we're going to continue to come back with. It's a living, breathing part of the process. So the second part is identifying assumptions. So this is really around constructing like a pro forma operational spec, so which really lays out all of the activities that we would need to produce, sell, and service and deliver that product. So these activities essentially lay out the venture's allowable costs. So what we can do is, on a really simple spreadsheet, just lay down all of these activities and what they are, and then we can get some basic data. What we then need to do is say, for each of those, what are the underlying assumptions that we've made? So, for example, we've said that we expect a revenue of $25 million. Now we're assuming that we have 2 desks per order to be able to do that. So we need to identify that. But we also need to give our assumptions a range. And an assumption range is very important, because if there isn't a range, it's therefore not an assumption. So in this example, we might say, well, we're expecting to have 2 desks per order. At a high level, we might get 3. And at the low level, we might get 1. It's an area that we don't need to be exact, because actually what this process is doing is learning about whether the assumption is not learning whether the assumption is right or wrong, it's learning what the range is. And as we go through the process, what we start to do is try to bring those ranges in, and we put learnings in place around those more sensitive assumptions to feed back into our reverse income statement. So what we've done so far is we've laid out all of the assumptions and we've given them a range. And then what we do is we feed that information back to the reverse income statement to see if it all, can we actually do that, and the tolerance that we've set out, which is having $20 million in allowable costs. So when we look at our example, we might have a very, this is just an example of perhaps an operations spec. So this is what the activities would be around advertising and the marketing for our digital desk company. So as you can see on the left, we've got all the activities, the desks per order, how the salaries for the sales teams and the commissions are going to work with our expected value. And where there's an assumption, we've identified as an assumption by giving it a number. You can also put down the benchmark as to what it is today, which is sometimes good data. But what's really important is your source. So if you've calculated something, make sure you call out that it's been calculated. If you've got it from competitors, or could just be Google, who knows? Wherever that source information's come from, we get it down there. And then when we drill a little bit more into the assumptions, what we can do is just tease those out a bit more. And this can just be in the same spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be a separate document. But what we've got here now is all of the assumptions that we've made and all of our activities to actually execute this venture laid out. We're saying what's likely, what is the low, and what is the high for each of these assumptions. And again, we're not questioning whether it's an assumption. We just need to get it down, and then we will start to test how sensitive that assumption is. We then feed that back to the reverse income statement based on what we've got for our likely costs. And what we can see in this case is, well, we've said that we need to get a revenue of 25 million, but what's important is the allowable costs. And because we've laid out the activities and we've got some assumptions around what those costs are, we can take a checkpoint right now as to whether or not it's even worth proceeding with this venture. Now, for a lot of the times when you don't do it this way, you could be actually already investing a lot of money on something that doesn't even stack up from the outset. So this gives you that sort of upfront test as to whether or not we're going to start investing money into developing this idea further. So the third part of discovery-driven growth is what we call the checkpoint plan. So, excuse me. So in the checkpoint plan, what we need to do is really understand the sensitivity of all of those assumptions. So what we do firstly is we prioritize the assumptions in the order that they are most sensitive to the outcome. So there are a number of different tools you can use for this. Cameron Associates have got some tools. In the past, I've just used a basic Monte Carlo simulation. But whatever you use, what it basically can do is say to us, well, out of all of these assumptions, this one is the most sensitive. And it's a really interesting exercise, and I can tell you from experience, the majority of times, the assumptions that you think of the ones that you should start with are more than often not. And I think we're always very, we're always inclined to jump in and, I don't know, build a prototype or do some sort of quite grand gesture as a start of an idea. And in fact, often the assumption that activity might be good for is often something that is quite low in the sensitivity. So once we've got the order of assumptions, what we then do is we create a plan, a checkpoint plan, where we identify ways of doing quick tests, cheap tests, effective tests on one or more of those assumptions, and we do those in order of priority. So for example, we might need to test the market price. That might come up as a high-level assumption. So we might want to do a survey, we might want to, we might want to do some sort of basic front-end screen and get a couple of customers to test things. You can be very, very, very creative here, and you want to spend as little as possible to learn as quickly as possible. And in fact, where you can spend imagination before spending money is even better. Once we've developed these tests, we can then go off, execute the tests, come back to our assumptions and use the learned data to feed back to those assumptions and reducing their uncertainties. And in doing that, it starts to make our reverse income statement more matter of fact. The other side of doing this is it also gives us different options. around the growth. If we were just to if we were to go, say, just build a prototype, for example, and spend the money and invest in that, we've already bet on that option as being the way to go forward. Whereas what this does is by doing things in the most sensitive way that they affect the reverse income statement, we're actually going to learn in a different order and in fact open up some new opportunities and new options that we might not have seen before if we had had that more vision tunnel. Once we've fed back to the reverse income statement, we can then sort of see where we sit. And it's really important that we always come back to the checkpoints as the triggers to decide to drive our decision making. So once we've gone through our first set of tests on our checkpoint plan, we feed that information back to the reverse income statement. We're then going to see, right, well, where does that sit us? Are we still in the right space? Is this still looking like a viable option for us as a business? And therefore, what will we do next? What is the next most sensitive assumption that we need to test? And what we do is we use these checkpoints as a formal means of driving the process. And we decide at this point whether we're going to pivot the plan. We may learn that by doing something in a certain way, there's different new ways of options for us to test. We might say, well, do you know what, we've learned that in fact, this is going to push our allowable costs out far too high, far past the tolerance, so let's stop. Or we might say, right, that's great, we've learned that, now let's move on to the next lot of assumptions and continue to commit to the investment. But it gives us an opportunity to make an informed decision based on data. So going back to our example, these are the assumptions that we had about our digital desk company, and what this is it's really just showing us the distribution of those assumptions and what effect that they will have on our profitability. So as you can see, the greatest assumption is the number of desks per order, and on the downside, if we get to the low level of that, we're looking at a negative profit. Whereas on the upside, we're actually looking at a higher profit than what we had anticipated before. So what we know is that desks per order is a really sensitive assumption to us moving forward. So we should develop our first checkpoint plan around that and maybe incorporate one or two of the other assumptions. So what we might then do is say, right, well, our plan's going to look like something like this. We might need to do a market study, a feasibility study up front, and when we do that, it's going to test a number of assumptions. Obviously, this is just the first half of the plan. You'll have who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, what investment we're going to put into it. But the idea is that all of these are very, very low-cost investments up front, but they're also very quick. So we can quickly learn fast and learn cheaply. As we continue to go through the cycle, what we'll find is that by continuing to test our assumptions in our checkpoint plan and then feeding back, we have a very agile process. So it's less of a process around saying innovation is going to meet every quarter and we're going to talk about all of the projects and see where we're up to. We're letting the innovation process drive our decision making, which is a really critical part to this. And this is the piece up front when I was talking about how we can teach our leaders and teach businesses, teach the decision makers in the business about an innovation cycle, an innovation process that leads towards changing culture. This is that part. We bring them into the checkpoint phase and have them participate in the discussions around assumptions and testing, and they will in turn start to get a way of being more creative in their leadership to help drive the overall innovation agility. This is just a graphic that takes you through this process that I've talked about, starting with the steady state P&L reverse income statement, driving that up into some sensitivity analysis, and then a checkpoint plan. And for those of you interested, please don't hesitate to contact me afterwards around some of the different tools and decisionware software out there that can also help drive this process. I've used the term options thinking a lot during this discussion, and essentially this is what discovery-driven growth will open up to you. So when we're talking about conventional, we often talk about NPV as being the way that we will measure. And when we say that, what we're committing to doing is saying we're going to make a decision today, we're not going to learn anything new, and we're not going to modify our plan. But when you sort of put the discovery-driven growth over top, what we're saying is the absolute opposite. We're actually saying let's not decide today. We're only going to make a decision as far as the information we know. We will learn. We will perhaps fail. We're open to failure as long as we do it with agility. And we are also open to modifying the plan and pivoting the plan where we need to. This process we know will largely eliminate the downside, but in turn it's going to allow us to capture an upside with far less reduced risks. So if we just reflect back to our assumption to sort of put some picture around this, this is essentially what we're saying. We can eliminate quite easily that downside, but what we are able to do is capture the upside, which is even greater than what we had anticipated at the outset. A real example for you, without company name, so almost real. This has been used most recently for a chemical company. So they had $18 million that they were able to invest, and they were trying to decide how to invest it. So this is, this is a real, a very important strategic decision around how they will put their money towards the future growth goals of the company. Do they continue to put it into the Horizon 1, the core business, or do they actually take a risk and invest into the Horizon 2, Horizon 3 growth platforms? In this case, what happened was there were 4 different platforms or themes for growth that this company were interested in. And so what happened, and this was work that was carried out by the Cameron Group, is that they actually went through and did 4 separate discovery-driven growth plans. So they did the reverse income statements, the assumptions, and the checkpoint plans, and executed those accordingly. And so what happened, at the very start of the process, there was, it looked to be that Platform 1 and Platform 2, so if you think of those perhaps as projects, they looked to have the best return and be the best investment option for this business. Now, in less than just 4 months, which is a pretty quick time by any business, what was learned is that by going through and testing the assumptions on all of these platforms, is that in fact those initial platforms that were determined to be the best investment option 4 months ago, in fact were not. And it was actually platforms 2 and 4 which proved to be a far better investment option for this business. Now, by using discovery-driven growth, they were able to go through that process in a far more agile and accelerated fashion and be able to ensure that they're investing in the right space. And so this is exactly what happened, and they did invest that money into those platforms 2 and 4. So based on that very quick example, we can sort of think back about Stacey. So yeah, she was a politician screaming from the rafters. She was trying to juggle absolutely everything. And what she did is she put all of that to the side. She used a process that allowed her to be credible and be relevant to the business by taking some ideas and putting them through the discovery-driven growth process. She was able to prove to people in the business very quickly that we can learn and we can make decisions, and in turn we can also get to an outcome far quicker, and we can do it with less people and with less time. So look at her now. She's pretty excited, right? So she's got she's got everything happening by doing this discovery-driven growth. She's not only brought tangible growth options to the business, but she's now developing a culture of innovation as a byproduct through the momentum that she's getting through that piece. And all the other things are falling into place that she was struggling so hard with. And do you remember the business? Right? These are the people who were probably internally less enthused about innovation. Well, they've changed their tune just a little bit as well. So, do you know what? I'm really pleased we looked at that idea again. I can guarantee you discovery-driven growth is so powerful with the people that you may have in your business that refuse to look at things because we looked at them before. I've had experiences where I've used this in those scenarios and turned blockers into massive supporters at the end. The resources that were no longer available, well, now that we don't need, we don't need people for 3 months at a time. We just need them to, help for 2 weeks on something and to inform an assumption. It's far more palatable. Those off-site workshops, wow, gosh, do you know what? Our culture's really exciting and we've got high retention rates. So finally, we are having a tangible impact on our next quarter's profits by way of the process. So overall, this discovery-driven growth, it's a framework and a way of developing your ideas, whether it can work for new products, services, new business opportunities, just helping you decide on an appropriate strategy. In fact, we use it in my household. I have an 11-year-old who I'm trying to encourage to come up with really exciting business ideas, and we have discovery-driven growth for teenagers here at the house, and we just talk through the process, and it's a fairly pragmatic way of developing new ideas. So I hope that you have been able to get something out of the session, that you've learned some tools and techniques that you might be able to replicate in your own businesses. My details are on screen now, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions that you may not either get a chance to ask today or just want to circle back. But now at this point, I think we will open up to questions. The first question, my screen's not showing them up so well, is, so how is this different from the lean startup approach by Eric Ries? The lean, obviously I can't speak on behalf of Eric, but the lean startup approach really actually is quite complementary to this process, particularly in the part where we're talking about how to test assumptions. So for those of you who are familiar with the lean startup approach, it's around build, measure and learn, and it's around applying quick lean tests. It's also very similar to something called prototyping. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that. And it really sits inside this process perfectly. So the real difference is that we're talking about building out a reverse income statement, highlighting and calling out all of our assumptions and understanding where they're most sensitive to drive our plan. And what that does is it drives the way that we're going to execute our plan, and where the lean startup stuff fits nicely in is around how to execute it. It's got some fabulous ways, and again, I also look at prototyping because that's an area that I spend a bit of time in. It's actually got some brilliant ways of how to execute the learnings around the checkpoint plan. I hope that's answered that question, Mark.